20 of the world's most renowned doctors couldn't save the dying young billionaire. But then, a 7-year-old girl selling roses outside the hospital noticed something they all had missed. And what she discovered shocked everyone in the room. Before we dive into the story, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The monitors screamed their electronic warnings as William Blake's vital signs plummeted for the 4th time in 6 hours. At 35, the tech billionaire who had revolutionized artificial intelligence was now fighting a battle that no amount of money could win. His breathing was shallow, labored, and getting worse by the minute. "His oxygen levels are critical again, Dr. Mitchell," Nurse Davis announced, her voice tight with concern. "Blood pressure is dropping fast." Dr. Samuel Mitchell, Chief of Internal Medicine at the Detroit Medical Center, wiped sweat from his forehead. In 30 years of practice, he had never encountered anything like this. 20 of the world's most renowned specialists had flown in from the Cleveland Clinic, the Mayo Clinic, and Harvard Medical School. Cardiologists, neurologists, toxicologists. They had run every test imaginable, tried every treatment protocol, and still, William Blake was slipping through their fingers. The MRI shows no brain trauma. The blood work is clean, except for the dropping oxygen saturation. Dr. Sarah Williams from the Cleveland Clinic muttered, flipping through the thick medical chart. "It's like his body is slowly shutting down for no apparent reason." Outside the intensive care unit's glass walls, the hospital corridors buzzed with unusual activity. Security guards kept reporters at bay, while Williams' legal team huddled in hushed conversations. The stock price of Blake Industries had plummeted by 20% since news of his condition leaked 3 days ago. In the corner of the hallway, almost invisible amidst the chaos, 7-year-old Chloe Anderson sat quietly on a waiting room chair, swinging her legs. Her mother, Rachel, had been working double shifts, cleaning the ICU floors and emptying trash bins, trying to stay close to the unfolding drama. Chloe clutched a worn teddy bear and watched the parade of important-looking doctors with wide, observant eyes. "Mommy, why do all those doctors look so worried?" Chloe whispered in her soft voice, tugging at her mother's uniform sleeve. Rachel Anderson knelt beside her daughter, smoothing Chloe's dark hair. "They're trying very hard to help that sick man, sweetie. Sometimes even the smartest doctors need time to figure things out." But Chloe's attention had shifted. Through the glass partition, she could see William Blake lying motionless on the hospital bed, connected to multiple machines. Something about the scene made her small hands tremble, and memories she had tried to forget came rushing back. The way his chest rose and fell with difficulty, the pale gray color of his skin, the strange, sweet smell that seemed to linger in the air around the room. Chloe had seen all of this before, 8 months ago, when her daddy had lain in a similar bed in the charity ward downstairs. And just like now, all the doctors had been puzzled, running tests, scratching their heads, while her daddy slowly faded away. Chloe's grip tightened on her teddy bear as a terrifying realization began to form in her young mind. She remembered something the doctors had missed about her daddy, something crucial that she had tried to tell them, but nobody had listened to a little girl. As another alarm began blaring from William Blake's room, Chloe stood up from her chair, determination burning in her dark eyes. She knew exactly what was happening to the billionaire, and this time, she wasn't going to let anyone ignore her. Chloe took a deep breath and walked toward the nurse's station, her small sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The head nurse, Mrs. Wilson, was frantically coordinating with the medical team when Chloe tugged at her white coat. "Excuse me, Mrs. Wilson," Chloe said politely, her voice barely audible above the chaos. "I need to tell the doctor something really important about Mr. Blake." Mrs. Wilson barely glanced down, her fingers flying across the computer keyboard as she updated patient charts. "Not now, sweetie. The doctors are very busy trying to help the sick man. Why don't you go sit with your mother and maybe draw some pictures?" "But I know what's wrong with him," Chloe insisted, her voice growing more urgent. She stepped closer to the station, standing on her tiptoes to be seen better. My daddy had the same thing, and the doctors couldn't figure it out either. But I remember Chloe Anderson. Her mother's voice cut through the corridor like a whip. Rachel hurried over, her cleaning cart rattling behind her, face flushed with embarrassment and exhaustion from working 16-hour shifts. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Wilson. She's been worried about that patient since yesterday." "Come on, honey. We can't bother the nurses when they're trying to save someone's life." "But Mommy, I'm not bothering them. I'm trying to help," Chloe protested as her mother gently but firmly guided her away from the nurses' station. Nobody listened when Daddy was sick, and now nobody's listening about Mr. Blake, and he's going to die. Just like enough, Rachel whispered sharply, kneeling down to Chloe's eye level near the hospital's large windows overlooking Grant Park. "Chloe, I know you miss Daddy terribly. We both do. But you can't keep thinking that every sick person has what Daddy had. These are the best doctors in the world. They know what they're doing." Through the glass partition, Chloe watched helplessly as another team of specialists rushed into William Blake's room. Dr. Mitchell was shaking his head while consulting with a toxicologist from Boston Children's Hospital who had flown in that morning. The billionaire's legal team paced anxiously in the hallway, their expensive suits wrinkled from days of stress. Security guards kept reporters and photographers at bay, but Chloe could see the camera crews gathered on the street below. "Look at all those doctors, Mommy," Chloe said quietly, pressing her small hand against the cool glass. 20 of them, and they all look scared, just like the doctors looked when they couldn't help Daddy. Rachel's heart ached as she watched her daughter's mature observation. At 7 years old, Chloe had already witnessed more medical trauma than most adults. But Rachel couldn't let her daughter live in the fantasy that she could solve mysteries that stumped world-renowned physicians. That night, Chloe lay awake on the small cot the hospital had provided for families of employees working extended shifts. The ICU never truly slept. There were always monitors beeping, nurses checking on patients, the soft whisper of conversations in multiple languages as international specialists consulted through the night. Chloe stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the small holes in each square, but her mind kept drifting back to those final weeks with her father. She remembered how Thomas Anderson, who had been strong enough to carry her on his shoulders for hours, had gradually become so weak he couldn't lift a glass of water. The doctors had run so many tests: blood work, x-rays, MRIs, CT scans. They checked for cancer, for heart disease, for lung problems related to his construction work. But nothing explained why a healthy 32-year-old man was simply fading away. Most clearly of all, Chloe remembered the smell, that strange, sweet scent that had clung to her father's hospital room, growing stronger each day until it was almost overwhelming. She'd asked the nurses about it, but they dismissed it as cleaning products or flowers from the chapel downstairs. But now, 3 floors up in the VIP wing, she'd smelled that exact same scent drifting from William Blake's room. 8 months earlier, 7-year-old Chloe had spent countless hours by her father's bedside in the charity ward on the 3rd floor. Thomas Anderson, who had immigrated from Mexico 15 years ago and worked his way up from day laborer to construction foreman, had been reduced to a frail shadow of himself in just 2 weeks. The charity ward was different from the VIP wing, where Mr. Blake lay fighting for his life. The rooms were smaller, cramped with 2 beds each, and the hallways echoed with a dozen different languages as families from all over the world kept vigil over their loved ones. But the medical mystery had been just as baffling. "It's probably some kind of environmental exposure," Dr. Garcia had told Chloe's mother during one of their brief consultations in the hallway. He was a kind man, but Chloe could see the frustration in his eyes as he flipped through her father's thick chart. Construction workers encounter many hazardous materials over their careers. "We are checking for asbestos exposure, lead poisoning, chemical toxicity from paints and solvents. His lungs show some scarring, consistent with long-term dust exposure, but nothing that would explain this rapid decline." Chloe had been sitting quietly in the corner, coloring in a Disney princess book that one of the nurses had given her. but she was listening to every word. She'd learned to be very still and quiet during medical discussions, because that's when the adults forgot she was there and said important things. "What about the smell?" Chloe had piped up suddenly, causing both Dr. Garcia and her mother to look down at her in surprise. "Daddy's room smells different than all the other rooms. Sweet, like when Grandma makes marzipan cookies at Christmas." Dr. Garcia had smiled and patted Chloe's head gently. "Hospitals have many different smells, little one. Sometimes we use special cleaning products, and visitors bring flowers and food from home." But Chloe had persisted, standing up from her chair and tugging at the doctor's white coat. "No, Doctor Garcia, it's not like flowers or cleaning. It's sweet, but also bitter, and it makes my nose tingle. And Daddy says everything tastes like bitter almonds now, even his favorite coffee." She'd watched the doctor exchange a look with her mother, one of those adult looks that said, "Children say the strangest things without actually speaking." Dr. Garcia had made a note on his clipboard, but Chloe could tell he wasn't taking her seriously. "We'll look into everything. I promise," he'd said kindly. "Sometimes when people are very sick, their senses can play tricks on them." But Chloe knew it wasn't tricks. Every morning when she brought her father his breakfast tray, scrambled eggs and toast from the hospital cafeteria, he could barely eat more than a few bites. "Everything tastes wrong, my girl," he'd whispered weakly, his voice already starting to fade, "like someone put bitter medicine in my food." 3 days later, Thomas Anderson had died in the pre-dawn hours, while Chloe and her mother dozed fitfully in the uncomfortable chairs beside his bed. The death certificate listed the cause as acute respiratory failure of unknown origin, and the case was closed. Now, 8 months later, Chloe understood with crystal clarity what the adults had missed. The sweet almond smell wasn't from cleaning products or flowers. Her father's strange taste complaints weren't from being sick. Someone had been slowly poisoning him, just like someone was now poisoning Mr. Blake. And this time, Chloe wasn't going to let the adults ignore her. Dr. Samuel Mitchell was reviewing William Blake's latest blood work results for the 3rd time that morning when a small, determined voice interrupted his concentration. "Doctor, please, I really need to talk to you about Mr. Blake." He looked down from his desk to see Chloe Anderson standing beside his chair, clutching a manila folder against her chest. Her dark eyes were filled with a determination that seemed far too mature and intense for a 7-year-old girl. She was wearing the same pink sweater she'd had on for 2 days, and her hair was pulled back in a slightly crooked ponytail that spoke of a working mother's hurried morning routine. "Little girl, I'm very busy right now, Doctor," Mitchell said, glancing at his watch. It was barely 7 a.m., and he'd been at the hospital for 18 straight hours. Dark circles under his eyes revealed the toll that William Blake's mysterious condition was taking on the entire medical team. "Your mother should be watching you more carefully. The ICU isn't a playground. My name is Chloe Anderson, and my mother is working the night shift cleaning the floors," she replied with surprising composure and precision. "She doesn't know I'm here because I snuck away from the family waiting room. Mr. Blake is going to die if you don't listen to me, just like my daddy died 8 months ago from exactly the same thing." Something in her tone, the matter-of-fact way she discussed her father's death, the adult vocabulary, the steady eye contact, made Dr. Mitchell pause his review of the medical charts. He'd been working around the clock for 3 days, consulting with colleagues from around the world, and desperation was beginning to cloud his usually methodical thinking. Still, the idea of taking medical advice from a child seemed not just absurd, but potentially dangerous. "Chloe, I appreciate that you want to help Mr. Blake, and I'm sorry about your father," Dr. Mitchell said gently but firmly, turning slightly in his chair to face her properly. "But medicine is extremely complicated. The doctors treating Mr. Blake include some of the most brilliant physicians in the world. They've trained for decades to understand how the human body works." Chloe opened the folder she'd somehow acquired, her father's complete medical file from his 2-week stay in the charity ward. Dr. Mitchell's eyebrows shot up in alarm as he recognized the hospital's official documentation. Young lady, where did you get those records? Patient files are strictly confidential, and there are serious legal consequences for... I had to take them because nobody believes me, Chloe interrupted, her voice growing stronger. My daddy smelled like sweet almonds when he was sick, exactly like Mr. Blake's room smells now. And they both started having trouble breathing the same way, and their skin turned the same gray color, and the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong, even though they ran all the same tests. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, his medical curiosity beginning to override his concern about protocol violations. Chloe, what exactly do you mean by sweet almonds? Can you describe this smell more specifically? Chloe's face lit up with hope. Finally, an adult was asking her for details instead of dismissing her observations. It's not like regular almonds, Dr. Mitchell. It's sweeter, but also bitter, and it gets stronger every day. In Daddy's room, by the end, it was so strong that I felt dizzy when I stayed too long. And Mr. Blake's room smells exactly the same, but it's getting stronger, just like Daddy's did. Before Dr. Mitchell could respond, urgent alarms began blaring from the ICU. William Blake was crashing again, and this time his blood oxygen levels were approaching critically dangerous territory. But as Dr. Mitchell jumped up to rush toward the emergency, Chloe's precise description echoed in his mind. Sweet but bitter almonds, a progressively stronger odor, unexplained respiratory distress. Somewhere in the back of his memory, a half-forgotten toxicology lecture from medical school began to surface. The smell of bitter almonds was pathognomonic, a telltale sign of one specific type of poisoning that was notoriously difficult to detect in standard blood tests. Dr. Mitchell burst into William Blake's room just as the billionaire's heart rate spiked to a dangerous 140 beats per minute. The medical team was working frantically. Dr. Williams was adjusting his oxygen mask, while Dr. Chen from Stanford Medical checked his pupils with a penlight. Two nurses monitored multiple IV lines, and a respiratory therapist was preparing to increase the ventilator settings. His neurological responses are deteriorating rapidly, Dr. Chen reported grimly, his voice tight with professional concern. Pupil response is sluggish, reflexes are diminished, and his color is getting worse despite maximum oxygen therapy. It's like his entire system is shutting down systematically, but we can't identify the underlying cause. The room hummed with the sound of sophisticated medical equipment. As Dr. Mitchell joined the team, that distinctive sweet almond scent hit him immediately, stronger than ever before, almost overwhelming in the closed environment of the ICU room. Chloe's words rang in his ears with sudden, terrifying clarity, and a medical school memory crystallized with perfect, horrible precision. "I need everyone to step back for a moment," he announced suddenly, his voice carrying an authority that made the entire team pause their frantic activities. "Samuel, what are you doing? We're losing him," Dr. Williams protested, not moving away from the ventilator controls. "His oxygen saturation is dropping despite maximum support. If we don't intubate him in the next few minutes..." "The almond scent," Dr. Mitchell interrupted urgently, looking around the room at his colleagues. "Has anyone else noticed how strong it's gotten? It's not coming from cleaning products or flowers." The team exchanged confused glances. Dr. Chen nodded slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to growing concern. "Yes, I mentioned it to the nurses yesterday. I thought it might be some kind of new air freshener the hospital was using, but it's been getting progressively stronger each day, almost nauseating now." Dr. Mitchell's heart began racing as pieces of a deadly puzzle started falling into place with horrifying clarity. "I need an emergency cyanide blood test ordered stat, and I mean immediately. Not the standard toxicology panel we've been running, but a specific hydrogen cyanide level." "Cyanide?" Dr. Williams looked stunned. "Samuel, we've run comprehensive toxicology panels every day. Multiple panels. There's been no indication of any kind of poisoning, and certainly nothing suggesting cyanide exposure." Standard tox screens often miss cyanide, especially if it's being administered in small, repeated doses over several days. Dr. Mitchell explained rapidly, his medical training taking over. The sweet almond odor is pathognomonic for hydrogen cyanide poisoning. The progressive respiratory failure despite oxygen therapy, the unexplained metabolic decline, the gray-blue skin color, it all fits the classic presentation. Outside in the corridor, Chloe pressed her face against the glass window, watching the doctor's work with renewed urgency. Her mother, Rachel, had discovered her missing from the waiting room and now tried to pull her away from the ICU. "Mommy, look, they're finally listening," Chloe whispered, her breath fogging the glass. "They're going to test for the poison that killed Daddy. They're going to help Mr. Blake like they should have helped us." But even as hope flickered in Chloe's heart, William Blake's monitors continued to show his vital signs deteriorating. If Dr. Mitchell was correct about the cyanide poisoning, they had successfully identified the weapon, but they were still missing the most crucial elements of the crime. Who was systematically murdering William Blake with one of the most deadly poisons known to medicine? How were they gaining access to him in the most secure wing of the Detroit Medical Center? And most terrifyingly of all, were they planning to strike again before the antidote could save his life? The emergency cyanide blood test results arrived 47 agonizing minutes later, and Dr. Mitchell's worst medical fears were confirmed in stark, undeniable numbers. William Blake's blood showed dangerously elevated levels of hydrogen cyanide, not from a single massive dose that would have killed him immediately, but from careful, systematic poisoning administered over several days to create the illusion of a mysterious, progressive illness. "This is attempted murder," Dr. Mitchell announced grimly to the assembled medical team, holding up the lab results with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion and shock. "Someone has been deliberately administering calculated amounts of cyanide, probably through his food or medication, timing the doses to mimic a natural decline that would baffle medical professionals." Dr. Williams stared at the test results in complete disbelief. "But how is that possible? He's been under constant medical supervision for 3 days. Every medication is tracked and verified by multiple nurses. Every meal comes directly from the hospital kitchen and is delivered by trusted staff. Every visitor has been logged and monitored by security." The implications were staggering and terrifying. Someone with intimate access to the Detroit Medical Center's most secure wing was attempting to commit the perfect murder, using one of the most difficult-to-detect poisons, while surrounded by some of the world's best medical minds. As the medical team immediately began emergency cyanide treatment protocols, Chloe sat in the corridor with tears streaming down her face. Through the glass partition, she watched the controlled chaos of doctors and nurses working to save a life that she had helped identify was in danger. "My daddy could have lived," she whispered to herself, her small hands clenched into fists. "If they had just listened to me, if they had tested for this poison, Daddy would still be here." Rachel knelt beside her daughter, finally beginning to understand the enormous weight of grief and knowledge that Chloe had been carrying alone for 8 months. "Honey, you tried to tell them about Daddy's symptoms, didn't you? The sweet smell, the way his food tasted wrong." Chloe nodded, her small body shaking with emotion and exhaustion from fighting to be heard by adults who saw her only as a grieving child with an overactive imagination. "The doctors said I was just a little girl who didn't understand medical things. They said children sometimes make up stories when they're scared, but I knew something was wrong, Mummy. I knew Daddy was being hurt by something, and I couldn't make anyone believe me." Dr. Mitchell emerged from the ICU 20 minutes later and walked directly to Chloe with an expression that mixed cautious medical optimism with profound respect. For the first time in 3 days of medical crisis, there was genuine hope in his tired eyes. "Chloe," he said quietly, kneeling down to her eye level in the hospital corridor, "you saved William Blake's life tonight. If you hadn't insisted on telling us about the almond smell and the connection to your father's case, Mr. Blake would have died within hours. The cyanide levels in his blood were approaching lethal concentrations. Chloe looked up at him with eyes that held far too much wisdom and pain for her 7 years. Will he be okay now? Will the medicine work? He's responding well to the antidote treatment, and his vital signs are already starting to stabilize, Dr. Mitchell assured her. But Chloe, now we have a much bigger and more dangerous problem. Someone is systematically trying to murder him using a sophisticated poison, and they clearly have access to this hospital. Until we identify who is doing this and how they're administering the cyanide, Mr. Blake is still in mortal danger. As if summoned by his ominous words, Detective Linda Carter appeared in the corridor with 2 uniformed officers. The police had been called immediately when the cyanide poisoning was confirmed, and now the Detroit Medical Center had become the scene of an active attempted murder investigation. Chloe's heart raced as she realized the full, terrifying scope of what they had uncovered. If someone was successfully poisoning Mr. Blake in the most secure wing of one of the city's best hospitals, they would almost certainly try again. And, even worse, a new and horrible possibility was forming in her mind. What if her father's mysterious illness and unexplained death hadn't been mysterious at all? What if someone had murdered Thomas Anderson 8 months ago using the exact same method, and the only witness had been a 7-year-old girl that nobody would listen to? Detective Linda Carter had been investigating homicides for 12 years, but she'd never encountered a case quite like this one. A 7-year-old girl had solved a poisoning that stumped 20 world-renowned doctors. And now that same child might hold the key to identifying a killer who had nearly committed the perfect crime. Chloe, I know this is scary, but I need you to tell me everything you remember about your father's time in the hospital, Detective Carter said gently, sitting cross-legged on the floor to be at eye level with the little girl. Even tiny details that might not seem important. Chloe clutched her worn teddy bear tighter, glancing nervously at her mother, Rachel, who sat beside her in the hospital family conference room. The past few hours had been overwhelming. My daddy was sick for exactly 14 days, Chloe began slowly, her voice soft but precise. He came to the hospital on a Tuesday because he couldn't breathe well at the construction site. The foreman, Mr. Jameson, drove him here in his truck because Daddy was too weak to drive himself. Detective Carter took careful notes, impressed by the child's attention to detail. Do you remember who visited your father during those 2 weeks? Friends from work? Neighbors? Anyone who brought food or gifts? Chloe's brow furrowed in concentration. Uncle Mike came every day after work. He's Daddy's best friend, and they worked on the same construction crew. Mrs. Rogers from our apartment building brought homemade soup twice. And... Chloe paused, a strange expression crossing her face. What is it, sweetheart? Rachel asked, stroking her daughter's hair. There was a lady, Chloe said slowly. A nurse I didn't recognize. She only came during visiting hours, never when the regular nurses were doing their rounds. She was always very nice to me, gave me candy and coloring books, but she spent a lot of time adjusting Daddy's IV bags and bringing him special drinks that she said would help him feel better. Detective Carter leaned forward intently. Can you describe this nurse? What did she look like? She had blonde hair in a ponytail, and she wore glasses with red frames, Chloe said, closing her eyes to remember better. She was tall and skinny, and she always smelled like the perfume they sell at the pharmacy downstairs. She told me her name was Nurse Kelly, but I never saw her name tag. Rachel's face went pale. Chloe, why didn't you ever tell me about this special nurse? She said it was our secret, Chloe replied innocently. She said some patients need extra special care that the other nurses didn't know about, and I shouldn't mention her visits because it might make the other nurses feel bad. A chill ran down Detective Carter's spine. A mysterious nurse with no identification administering unauthorized treatments while convincing a child to keep secrets. It was textbook predatory behavior designed to create the perfect cover for murder. Chloe, this is very important, the detective said urgently. Have you seen this same woman anywhere in the hospital during the past few days while Mr. Blake has been sick? Chloe's eyes widened as a terrifying realization began to dawn. Yesterday, when I was trying to tell Mrs. Wilson about the almond smell, I saw her walking past Mr. Blake's room. She was wearing different clothes, not a nurse's uniform, but it was definitely the same lady, the same red glasses and blonde ponytail. The conference room fell silent, except for the sound of Detective Carter's pen scratching furiously across her notepad. They now had their first real lead in what was clearly a premeditated double murder attempt, and the only witness was a 7-year-old girl whose father had been the killer's first victim. But if this mysterious woman had successfully murdered Thomas Anderson 8 months ago and nearly succeeded with William Blake, how many other mysterious illnesses at the Detroit Medical Center might actually have been carefully orchestrated murders? Within 2 hours, Detective Carter had mobilized a full investigative team. The hospital security office became a makeshift command center as detectives reviewed months of surveillance footage, employee records, and visitor logs. Chloe sat with a police sketch artist, patiently describing every detail she could remember about the mysterious Nurse Kelly. "Oh, she had a small scar on her left hand right here," Chloe said, pointing to the space between her thumb and index finger. "And when she smiled, one of her front teeth was slightly crooked. Oh, and she always carried a big black purse with silver buckles." Dr. Mitchell had provided Detective Carter with a comprehensive list of everyone who'd had access to William Blake's room over the past 4 days. Nurses, doctors, specialists, cleaning staff, security guards, even the volunteers. "Here's what doesn't make sense," Detective Carter explained to Captain Williams, who had arrived to personally oversee the high-profile case. "We've accounted for every official hospital employee who entered Blake's room, but security footage shows at least 6 instances over 3 days when someone in scrubs entered his room during shift changes. Times when the hallway cameras would record them, but the on-duty nurses were busy with other patients." Captain Williams studied the blurry surveillance images on the computer screen. "The person is always wearing a surgical mask and cap, keeping their head down. Professional behavior designed to avoid identification, but look at this." He pointed to one particular image. "The body height and build could match the description the little girl gave us." Meanwhile, Rachel Anderson had been thinking about Chloe's description of the mysterious nurse, and troubling memories were surfacing. "Detective Carter," she called out across the busy security office, "I need to tell you something about my husband's medical bills." "What about them?" "After Thomas died, the hospital billing department kept sending us charges for medications and treatments that I don't remember him receiving," Rachel explained, pulling out a folder of medical bills she'd brought from home. "Special IV nutrients, experimental medications, consultations with specialists who supposedly visited him. But I was there almost every day, and I never saw most of these treatments happening." Detective Carter examined the billing records with growing excitement. Someone had been systematically documenting fake treatments to justify extended access to Thomas Anderson's room, the perfect cover for repeated poisoning attempts disguised as medical care. "This killer is extremely sophisticated," Detective Carter realized. As the investigation intensified, a disturbing pattern began to emerge from the hospital's records. Over the past 2 years, the Detroit Medical Center had experienced an unusual number of unexplained deaths among patients who should have recovered from routine procedures. All had occurred during evening or weekend shifts when skeleton crews were on duty. All had involved patients from lower-income families who were less likely to demand second opinions or question medical procedures. And all had happened in rooms that security footage showed were visited by an unidentified person in scrubs during shift changes. Chloe Anderson wasn't just the key witness to 2 poisoning attempts. She might be the only person who could help them identify a serial killer who had been operating undetected in the Detroit Medical Center for years. Dr. Mitchell approached Detective Carter with grave concern etched across his face. We have a serious problem. William Blake's condition has stabilized, but whoever tried to kill him doesn't know that we've identified the poison. If they think he's still dying from mysterious causes, they might attempt to finish the job. That's exactly what I'm hoping for, Detective Carter replied grimly. We're going to set a trap. The plan was carefully orchestrated with the hospital administration's full cooperation. Public announcements would continue to describe William Blake's condition as critical and unexplained, while privately, a team of undercover detectives would monitor his room around the clock. The trap was set for the evening shift. Undercover officers posed as family members in the waiting areas, while others dressed as hospital maintenance workers positioned themselves throughout the VIP wing. At 7:43 p.m., the hospital security cameras captured a figure in scrubs and a surgical mask entering through the staff entrance near the parking garage. The person moved confidently through the corridors, nodding professionally to other medical staff, carrying a small black medical bag. Detective Carter watched the live feed from the security office with growing anticipation. That's our suspect. Same build, same height as the sketch description. And look, she pointed to the screen. Red glasses frames visible even under the surgical mask. The figure approached William Blake's room just as a shift change was occurring. The exact timing that would provide maximum opportunity and minimum observation from regular staff. But this time, instead of an unguarded victim, the room contained a fully conscious patient under round-the-clock police protection. As the suspect reached for the door handle to William Blake's room, Detective Carter gave the signal to her team positioned throughout the corridor. Police, freeze! Hands where we can see them! But instead of surrendering, the figure turned and ran toward the emergency stairwell, revealing something that made Detective Carter's blood run cold. The person wasn't just carrying a black medical bag. Strapped to their waist was a small device that looked suspiciously like an explosive. If they couldn't complete their mission to kill William Blake quietly, they were apparently prepared to eliminate all the witnesses who could identify them, even if it meant destroying an entire wing of the Detroit Medical Center. The chase through the Detroit Medical Center's emergency stairwells lasted only 3 minutes, but it felt like hours to Detective Carter as she pursued the fleeing suspect down 7 flights of concrete steps. The killer was fast and clearly familiar with the hospital's layout, but the weight of the medical bag and explosive device slowed their escape. "Stop! There's nowhere to go!" Detective Carter shouted as backup officers sealed off all the building exits. "The hospital is surrounded." On the ground floor landing, the suspect finally stopped running and slowly turned around. With deliberate movements, they reached up and removed the surgical mask and cap, revealing the face that Chloe Anderson had described with perfect accuracy 8 months ago. Dr. Jennifer Foster, a respected anesthesiologist who had worked at the Detroit Medical Center for 6 years. Dr. Foster. Detective Carter stared in shock. She'd interviewed Jennifer Foster twice during the investigation, and the woman had been cooperative, professional, even helpful in suggesting medical theories about William Blake's mysterious illness. "You don't understand what you've done," Dr. Foster said calmly, her hand hovering near the device at her waist. "William Blake isn't just some innocent billionaire. He's the reason my brother is dead." "What are you talking about, Doctor?" "Foster? 3 years ago, Blake Industries developed an AI system for medical diagnostics. My brother David was one of the lead programmers. He discovered that the system had fatal flaws. It would misdiagnose critical conditions in poor patients while prioritizing treatment for wealthy ones. When David tried to blow the whistle, William Blake had him fired and blacklisted from the entire tech industry." Dr. Foster's voice grew harder, more bitter. David couldn't find work anywhere. He lost his apartment, his insurance, his hope. He died by suicide 18 months ago because William Blake destroyed his life to protect his company's profits. "That doesn't justify murder," Detective Carter said firmly. "And what about Thomas Anderson? What did Chloe's father ever do to you?" A twisted smile crossed Dr. Foster's face. "Thomas Anderson was supposed to be practice. I needed to perfect the cyanide delivery method, to understand exactly how much to use and how frequently to administer it. I chose him because he was poor, undocumented, and no one would question a construction worker dying from a job-related illness. The casual cruelty of using an innocent man as a guinea pig for murder made Detective Carter's stomach turn. I never intended for the child to be so observant, Dr. Foster admitted. When she started asking questions about smells and symptoms, I realized she was more perceptive than I'd anticipated. But children's testimony isn't taken seriously in medical settings. I figured I was safe. Through her radio earpiece, Detective Carter heard that Chloe and Rachel Anderson had been safely evacuated from the hospital. Bomb squad specialists were en route, but they needed more time. Dr. Foster, I need you to carefully remove that device and place it on the ground, Detective Carter said. We can work out a deal. But Dr. Foster shook her head sadly. You still don't understand. William Blake isn't my only target. His company's AI systems have been installed in hospitals across the country. Hundreds of poor patients have died because of diagnostic bias built into his algorithms. He's a mass murderer who hides behind philanthropy and medical innovation. Her hand moved back toward the detonator. Sometimes justice requires sacrifice. High above them, in the hospital's VIP wing, Chloe Anderson was about to provide one final crucial insight that would save everyone's life and reveal the last piece of Dr. Foster's deadly plan. In the hospital's emergency command center, Chloe Anderson sat beside her mother while FBI bomb specialists coordinated with the police to end the standoff safely. Through the radio communications, she could hear Detective Carter trying to negotiate with Dr. Foster in the stairwell, 7 floors below. But something about the conversation wasn't making sense to Chloe. She tugged at Captain Williams's sleeve urgently. Captain, I need to tell Detective Carter something important about Dr. Foster, Chloe said with the same determined voice she'd used to convince the doctors about the cyanide poisoning. What is it, sweetheart? When she visited my daddy in the hospital, she wasn't just giving him poison, Chloe explained quickly. She was also asking him lots of questions about his work, about which buildings he'd helped construct around the city. She seemed really interested in the new Blake Industries headquarters that his crew had been working on. Captain Williams felt a chill of realization. What kind of questions? About the ventilation systems, about where the executive offices were located, about security cameras and emergency exits. She said she was just curious about construction work, but Daddy thought it was weird that a nurse would ask so many detailed questions. Through the radio, Captain Williams could hear Dr. Foster's voice growing more agitated. But Chloe's revelation suggested that Dr. Foster's plan was far more extensive than they'd realized. She wasn't just planning to kill Mr. Blake in the hospital, Chloe continued urgently. She was going to use Daddy's information to attack the Blake Industries building too. That's why she needed to test the poison on him first, to make sure it would work when she used it on lots of people at once. Captain Williams grabbed his radio immediately. Detective Carter, the suspect has been planning a mass casualty event. She gathered intelligence about Blake Industries headquarters from the Anderson victim. The device she's carrying might be intended for a larger attack. In the stairwell, Detective Carter heard this update and understood the full scope of the threat they were facing. Dr. Jennifer Foster wasn't just a grief-stricken individual seeking personal revenge. She was a domestic terrorist planning to poison the water or air systems of an entire office building. Dr. Foster, we know about your plans for the Blake Industries headquarters, Detective Carter announced. It's over. We've evacuated the building and neutralized any chemical agents you might have placed there. Dr. Foster's face went white with shock. That's impossible. How could you know about... She stopped speaking as the implications hit her. The construction worker's daughter. She remembered our conversations. A 7-year-old girl outsmarted your entire operation, Detective Carter said firmly. The same child who identified the poison that nearly killed William Blake. The same child who provided the evidence that led us to you. Give up now, and maybe you can at least save yourself. For several long moments, Doctor. Foster stood frozen in the stairwell, her hand still hovering over the detonator. The device was powerful enough to collapse the emergency stairwell and potentially damage the hospital's structural integrity, but it was no longer part of a larger plan to kill dozens of people. My brother would have wanted justice, not more innocent deaths, Dr. Foster finally whispered, tears streaming down her face. She carefully removed the explosive device from her waist and placed it gently on the concrete floor. As bomb squad specialists carefully secured the device and Dr. Foster was taken into custody, Detective Carter climbed the 7 flights back to the command center. She found Chloe Anderson curled up in her mother's arms, exhausted from the most traumatic and heroic day of her young life. "Chloe," Detective Carter said softly, "you saved William Blake's life. You helped us catch your father's killer, and you prevented a terrorist attack that could have killed dozens of innocent people. You're the bravest person I've ever met." Chloe looked up with tired eyes that had seen far too much for a 7-year-old. "Does this mean Daddy's case won't be closed anymore? Does this mean people will know that he didn't just die from being sick?" "Yes, sweetheart," Detective Carter assured her. "Your father will be remembered as the victim of a crime, not a medical mystery. And because of your courage and intelligence, no one else will die the way he did." 3 weeks later, Chloe Anderson entered William Blake's penthouse hospital suite. She was wearing a new dress, a simple blue outfit her mother had bought specially for this meeting. Clutching her worn teddy bear and looking simultaneously brave and nervous, William Blake turned his wheelchair toward her, his eyes immediately filling with emotion. "Chloe," he said gently, his voice still slightly weak from the ventilator, "I've been wanting to thank you, but I honestly don't know if words exist for what you did for me." Chloe approached slowly, her mother Rachel walking beside her for support. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of police interviews, media attention, and therapy sessions to help Chloe process the trauma. "Are you feeling better, Mr. Blake?" Chloe asked with the straightforward sincerity that only children possess. "Do your lungs work well now? Do you still taste bitter almonds when you eat?" William Blake smiled, his first genuine smile since before his poisoning began. "No more bitter almonds thanks to you. The doctors say I'm going to make a complete recovery. But Chloe, I need to tell you something very important." He reached into a folder beside his wheelchair and pulled out several official-looking documents. "After Dr. Foster was arrested, I had my best investigators look into everything she told the police about my company's AI systems. And Chloe, she was right about some things. Our medical diagnostic software did have problems that hurt people who couldn't afford the best healthcare." Chloe listened intently as William Blake continued, his voice heavy with newfound responsibility and regret. "I've shut down those AI programs completely, and I'm starting a foundation to make sure that what happened to your father and to Dr. Foster's brother never happens to anyone else. But more importantly, I want to do something special for you." He handed Chloe an official letter embossed with the Blake Foundation logo. "Chloe, you're going to be our first ever Chief Child Safety Advocate. That means your job will be to make sure that when children have important things to say about their family's medical care, adults listen to them. Really listen." Chloe's eyes widened. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that hospitals all across the country are going to train their doctors and nurses to pay attention when children notice things that seem wrong," William Blake explained. "And it means that your father's death is going to help save other people's fathers and mothers and children." Tears were streaming down Rachel Anderson's face. Her husband's death, which had seemed so senseless and forgotten, was now going to prevent other families from experiencing the same tragedy. "There's something else, Chloe," William Blake continued. "I've been learning about your father, Thomas Anderson. He helped build 3 hospitals, 2 schools, and a children's community center. He was a good man who made the world a better place." He handed Chloe a second document, a memorial scholarship established in Thomas Anderson's name for children who wanted to become doctors, nurses, or medical researchers. Every year, kids who want to help sick people will be able to go to college because we'll remember your daddy and how much he loved his family. Chloe looked up at William Blake with eyes that were both sad and hopeful. Mr. Blake, will people really listen to children now? Even kids who don't have daddies anymore? Even kids whose families don't have lots of money? Yes, Chloe, I promise you that they will. And do you know why I can make that promise? Chloe shook her head. Because you proved that the smartest, bravest, most important person in that hospital wasn't one of the famous doctors or the rich patient. It was a 7-year-old girl who refused to give up, who kept trying to save people even when adults wouldn't listen to her. You showed everyone that wisdom and courage don't depend on how old you are or how much money your family has. 6 months later, Chloe Anderson stood at a podium in the auditorium of the Detroit Medical Center, addressing an audience of doctors, nurses, and hospital administrators from across the country. She was still only 7 years old, but her voice carried an authority that commanded the absolute attention of every adult in the room. When children tell you something is wrong, please don't say we're too little to understand, Chloe said into the microphone, her words broadcast to medical conferences around the world. Sometimes we see things that grown-ups miss. Sometimes we're the only ones paying attention. In the audience, Rachel Anderson watched her daughter with pride and amazement. Chloe had transformed her grief into a mission to help other families. My daddy can't come back, Chloe concluded, her voice steady and strong. But because you're going to listen to children now, other daddies and mommies will get to go home to their families. That's how we make sure that people who die weren't forgotten. We help them keep protecting people even after they're gone. And as the auditorium erupted in thunderous applause, Chloe Anderson, the little girl who had solved a mystery that stumped the world's best doctors, smiled with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned that age is just a number, that wisdom can come from anywhere, and that sometimes the smallest voice in the room is saying the most important thing. Stories like Chloe's show us the power of intuition and love. If you were moved too, hit that like button so more people can discover this incredible journey. Want more stories that warm the heart and make us think? Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a thing. Now we want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever felt that a child knew something the adults were ignoring? Tell us your story. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a dose of hope and a reason to believe in the strength of little heroes. See you in the next story. Sending a big hug.